All right, so I'll recap what I had said to myself earlier. Our agenda this afternoon, is so I linked to it a little bit earlier on. But generally, we're gonna just kind of socialize some changes, make sure everybody's aware of some cap discussions that are out there in the ether. I know that there's a TX meta change that we want to talk about quickly, and then we'll have some time just to kind of chat about fees. We got phase 2 live, which is very exciting. I posted the link and was talking about it. There wasn't much that changed for phase 2, but what was changed everything, right? The ledger increased, the ledger capacity increased, which allows more than single big transaction Orbon transactions. So that's all very exciting. And we'll just jump right into kind of just making sure everyone's aware of some particular discussions and links, and then we'll talk fees. So keep that in mind. I hope I don't have to talk to myself by myself this whole time. If there's folks that want to jump on and have questions or comments about particularly things like fees or other items that we get into, feel free to jump in or put something in the chat, and we'll discuss it. Okay. The first thing that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is this. I'm going to kind of just be pasting links. And I don't have a tremendous amount of familiarity with this particular XDR TX meta change. I know Dima's not on today. Looks like Lee, you've made some comments. I don't know if there's anything that we want to talk about with that one. But it sounds like we're increasing some visibility and analytics maybe inside of the TX meta for Sorbonne resources, which is awesome. Love to see more of that coming down the pike. So that's something to be aware of. I know that it's not going to become a cap or anything like that. So it would be easy for this to kind of slip through. Yeah, I don't know, Lee, if you want to, I don't know if you're able to, but if you can, jump on and then just kind of summarize what's going on here. Or Sid could also talk if they're on what this change is. I will not be the best person to summarize these.
Yeah, the changes exposing some information about what fees got charged for a transaction. So this is changes to the transaction matter. So it's like reflective, after the transaction has been processed, and everything in the matter gives you insight about, either what events got generated or what changed, and these fields are going to give more visibility into what fees got charged and uh, visibility about different components of the resource fee that are a little bit difficult to calculate on your own after the fact.
Nice. That sounds like an incredible change.
I think if Sydney might be able to go into some more detail about how how different systems might be going to use that, if she wanted to speak about that.
I'm not sure she's on the call. Oh, yeah, she is. Nice. Yeah, Sid, if you have anything to add, feel free. I know you're also making some changes on the Hubble side, maybe working on some Metabase stuff. Oh, maybe she had to restart just like I did. While we're waiting for that to come back, which I think, again, this one's amazing. Excited for this one to go live. There are also some GitHub discussions that I think I'd like to surface. Let me just paste a link. There's 3 of them, 3 that I'm particularly interested in. Lee, I know that you've got one of these and I've got 2. And these are more just so that people are aware. I don't know that there's too much to discuss about this unless people feel strongly about any one of these three. I know that I don't feel particularly strongly about mine. Mine would be the ephemeral contracts and allowing require auth from non-existent accounts. And then Lee, I know yours has gotten quite a bit of discussion on read-only invocations, but I haven't followed that one super closely. But those are, so we're using GitHub discussions, kind of the first place, a pre-cap, if you will. Sid, if you're back, if you had anything to add, I would love to have you on, jump on stage, but don't feel pressure if you don't want to. But you never know. I also have Discord issues.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Perfectly.
Sweet. Okay, sorry about that. It's my first time trying to speak on a stage. Turns out Discord permissions weren't updated. So these fee changes will be nice from the aspect that we're exposing the inclusion fee and resource fee separate, which should make any updates to like fee strategy around what you want to pay as a maximum inclusion fee bid easier, because you can profile what the fee bid has been in prior ledgers. For what it's worth, this information is already in Hubble, so we did the hard work of parsing TX meta changes before and after on account balances. So if you want to start profiling that kind of information now, you can query the history transactions table. Drop any questions you have in the Hubble channel and I'll help you out with that. But the XDR change just makes it easier if you wanted to save that information yourself in your own backend, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. I'm really excited with all the improvements and expansions we're adding to Hubble. It's an incredible tool. One of my favorite things to introduce to people who've only been using Horizon. Cool. Yeah, if anybody has questions or additional things they would like to talk about in regards to that, feel free to put it in chat or just jump on. I think, Morgan, you were particularly excited about this. Don't know if you had anything to add. Otherwise, we can move on to those open cap discussions. And again, if you just go to the GitHub Stellar Protocol discussions, there's a few of these that are open. And I think we've talked about it, but this is the place to like have a wild idea of something you might like to see included into Stellar. So it's not really an issue. It's kind of a feature request, but more just a place to have open discussion about something that you'd like to see become a cap. And there's a few sort of recent ones, and I've posted a link to those three in the chat here. I can talk about mine, and then Lee, I don't know if you want to maybe just talk about yours for a moment. I think the idea here is if people have ideas or questions or comments on these live, that's fine. Otherwise, it's really just an opportunity to let folks be aware that these are out there, and if they feel strongly or have had these particular issues, to chime in on those discussion threads. Otherwise, I think the idea is when something goes here, if it's not well supported and nobody else really has that issue, they will just die. And you'll eventually it'll never turn into anything, or you'll revive it at some point in the future. But it is nice to have a place to kind of have a pre-cap. You don't have to put in a whole bunch of thought. You can kind of have an idea and see what other people's ideas are. But mine are ephemeral contracts. So uploading a contract WebAssembly is pretty expensive. And then you have to connect it to an actual contract instance, the WebAssembly with a contract instance. And there will definitely be instances or cases where your contract is really only going to run once or infrequently enough that using a temporary entry rather than a persistent entry, I think would be kind of nice. So I put some ideas and some use cases in there. I know there, even like when I'm just testing, I've seen a lot of discrepancy between FutureNet, testnet, and mainnet fees. And so even there will be instances where I will want to run tests on a main network, but after that, I'll kind of be done with my contract. I'll have made some improvements and want to upload a different one. And having that be a cheap thing to do by using a temporary entry versus persistent entry, I think it'd be really nice. I don't think it's essential. I don't know if it's the best way to run tests, if there's other ways around it, but it was an idea. We have this concept of temporary and persistent entries. I can see instances and cases where having kind of ephemeral contracts would be really nice. So there's that one. Then there's the allow require auth from non-existent accounts. I'm working on an article about authentication for require auth and require auth for ARGs. And it surprised me that you actually can't authenticate Sorbonne auth entries with a Stellar account that has not been created on chain. So you can't use require auth or require auth for ARGs on accounts that haven't been created on Stellar. And I don't like that. It doesn't seem like a strict requirement. So I would like to see the ability to just kind of have these non-existent accounts be able to sign for basic, or just basically use the require auth the end or the source, or address, require auth for ARGs. Obviously, you can't store balances or trust lines or do anything else with that account that doesn't exist. I understand that. I'm fine with that. But it does seem like it'd be a really nice UX to basically hold non-funded accounts in your wallet and use those for multi-sig scenarios on Sorbonne auth entries, and not have to fund all of the accounts. I don't know if anybody else needs this, or at least it struck me as odd, kind of caught me by surprise. I don't know if other people feel the same way. If you do, that would be a good one to head over to and add your 2 cents. Yeah, so there's a comment here. Funding is cheap enough, so it's not a big deal. I think that's probably true. It just continues to add things to the ledger, and if all you're using it for is signing something, it's got to get funded somehow. Somebody has to pay for it, and it also gets stored on ledger, so it increases ledger size. So I don't know how often or what the case might be that it might become commonplace to sign addresses, sign transactions with accounts that haven't been funded. But I also think it's a weird sort of to ask for something that just generally isn't very possible. But I don't love that we don't have the ability to do almost like this concept of key rotation that's really common in anywhere other than decentralized finance, where you don't use the same keys forever. You rotate your secrets, you change out your passwords. It's not something that we really do much in blockchain because it's either expensive or just a bit of work to transfer over a bunch of accounts or deal with multi-sig. And having the ability to have ephemeral accounts do signing would make make it really trivial to just use a different account to sign stuff. So I would like to see something like this considered at least, but I don't feel particularly strongly. But that's why we discuss it. Lee, I don't know if you're able or interested in talking about your read-only invocations. I know this is something that we've talked about a bit in the past, of being able to basically enforce particular Sorbonne functions be read-only. Are you able to get on? You have to request. Oh, there we go. Do you have to request to get on stage as SDF?
No, but
Okay.
it was fun.
Yeah, so this
yeah.
particular discussion, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the read-only invocations. Yeah, this is something I think I can't remember when this was first requested or who requested it. It was requested a long time ago during the development, uh, during like the initial development of Sorbonne. It was something that I think shows up for people because if you're coming from and have had any exposure to Solidity, then you will be familiar with the idea that you can write contract functions that are marked as in that ecosystem referred to as say view functions. You can write functions that guarantee that they don't um, write any data to the network, and Um, there's a few advantages with this. I would say like the advantages of any one any one advantage of this is not necessarily the biggest advantage, but there's just like a few smaller advantages of doing this, and others may be able to chime in and add others, but the main ones that I'm aware of is that you can sort of mark areas of code of your contractors. You know for sure that this area of code is not going to have any side effects. And with any sort of software engineering, avoiding side effects, unintended side effects um, is usually is usually a motivation. So um, if you write and then with contracts being a sometimes contract invocations being a decentralized tree of invocations that touch other contracts that you maybe haven't written but you're making assumptions about. um, it's great if you're writing a read only function to be able to get some guarantees around like, oh, the functions you're calling are also going to be read only and not going to have any sort of side effects as well. So um yeah, that's sort of where this is coming from. There's quite a few things that need to happen to really make the experience of read only functions work well. Like it's a protocol change because there needs to be some way for the environment itself to support read only functions. There needs to be a way for the environment to say, okay, like right now in this execution that's happening, if it's happening in a transaction that's actually being processed on the network, um, nothing is going to be allowed to change. And the two main things that we think of when we think of there being no change is one, no storage being written, and then two, no events being written. And then um, the other things that also need change is things like in the SDK. So it should be hard to write code where um, it should be hard for me as a developer to write code where I accidentally call another contract's write function, like a function that does write, or it should be hard for me as a developer to call a host function that writes some storage or publishes an event. And then the other advantage we get out of this is it becomes really, really obvious when, okay, these are functions you can just call locally without needing to even submit the transaction to chain as well. I could see Morgan had a question. Wouldn't it be the case if you could use get ledger entries for free versus read only? I don't totally follow Morgan, but did you want to jump on?
Hey, so I'm just curious as to the use cases, and I've been enjoying Get Ledger entries more and more. And wouldn't it be the case that it's a free RPC call? You get the values anyway, and those functions would still return either those values in the Get Ledger entries or some processed product, but for money, for fees.
So there's like my understanding is that the reason to do a read only method wouldn't be primarily for like delivering client side data. It would more be for proving some sort of read on chain, or particularly in the case of cross contract calls, you could ensure that like a cross contract can't really do a get ledger entries, right? It has to pull from some other contracts method, and it would be really nice to be able to, I don't know if it would be really nice, but I think the pitch is it'd be nice to be able to ensure that in the case of a cross contract call that is only getting data or not actually producing any effects, that it absolutely wouldn't, right? There's no like hidden event that when this gets cross contract called, it's going to end up producing a really expensive cross contract call because there was some event that was included. But I don't know if there's Lee, if there's more things here, because it kind of almost sounds like it's more like you could accidentally write a bad contract, and this ensures that you write a cheap contract. So I don't know if that's like the best way to handle this particular issue. I'd be curious in like the Ethereum ecosystem why they included this, or like Solidity, why they included a ensure this has no side effects flag for methods. Because you can
Yeah.
accomplish the same thing even if you don't include that flag. It just ensures that there isn't. But it all really kind of comes down to how you write the internals of the function.
Right. And Stellar does already provide some features for you today. If you, as the caller, the user, the client, like the wallet holder, calling a contract, wants to make sure that there isn't any rights. Sorbin does provide some of this functionality in the sense that you can set your footprint so that your footprint doesn't
Right.
write to anything, and it's only read only. I mean, that at least covers the footprint and the storage. There's nothing you can really do to prevent, say, an event being written. So yeah, but this is more about maybe putting that in the hands of the contract developer themselves. But yeah, that's a good point about Solidity, and I might see if I can find what some of the history is there as well, so we can get a little bit more depth on that.
Yeah, I'd be curious because I think that they've got at least those three flags. One that's it can do a lot of things, or it's called like payable. Then there's it could write data, and then there's it does nothing, which is always a little bit odd to me. And I'd be curious if the original intent was really just for client side data. I don't know how easy it was originally to get data off of chain before you had aggregators. And then they may have just wanted a way to flag this is like a client function for you to get data versus like a cross contract call. But I don't know. I'd be curious. Good. I see Moots is typing. I don't know, Moots, if you want to keep typing, you're more than welcome to. Or you can jump on. It seems like maybe you are interested in this one. And maybe have some background on it. I don't know. But regardless, if people have opinions on this and want to argue about it and to eventually get it to become some sort of cap, the discussion there in the GitHub would be a great place to do that. Okay, so that covers our GitHub discussions. And there are a few more that I don't know really much about at all, and I think are a little bit older. But I certainly like to go over to that GitHub discussions and just keep an eye on that. Lots of interesting things happen there. Cool. I think I'm going to save fees for last. I do want to spend some time talking about that. And I feel like that's the loose cannon. We might be done with that quickly, or it could take 6 hours, depending on who all gets on. So we'll save that one for last. The only other item that I have on my list is Naman and I were talking briefly before solidifying the agenda on the concept of enabling contract discovery. And I think Naman may have more ideas around this than I do. I know he has a cold, though. I don't know, Naman. You can feel free to opt out. But if you want to, jump on and say something about kind of your vision behind what this is and what you're kind of looking for, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll try to get some words out between my coughs. But I mean, generally speaking, I was sort of contemplating around the idea of discoverability of smart contracts, right? Like if I go on a block explorer right now and try to sort of what's going on, I see a lot of transactions and I see a lot of contracts, but it's a lot of times not clear to me what contracts belong to what app. Now, not all contracts are the ones that I personally might care about, right? But then a lot of the ones I would obviously care about. I want to sort of see what's happening with those contracts. So I feel like there is a space for us to maybe as an ecosystem figure out how do you sort of enable that discoverability aspects of contracts, right? So that's sort of the problem as I think of it. this could go in many different ways. For example, Blog Explorers could maintain a list. Etherscan, for example, like I can go create an account in Etherscan, and then I can label a contract or a transaction, right? And that is data to Etherscan on maintaining the centralized list. Every time there's a hack, for example, they're clearly able to label certain contracts and sort of provide context to the ecosystem around that contract's nefariousness, right? So like I'm not saying that's regularly good, but that's sort of one direction to think in. The other way could be like, I don't know, there could be like some SEP metadata, like anytime you and I were sort of jamming about the TOML file, which is like used extensively by assets and anchors. And I'm not actually sure if contract does use it, but it could be that in your sort of stellar.toml, you just have sort of a list of your contract addresses, which helps blog explorers and other folks sort of who want to engage with your app identify that yes, they are actually dealing with the right app, right? That could be one idea. Other idea could be like maybe like a contract list standard, like like I know that you guys have worked on token list standard, and it's sort of come a very long way. What if we were sort of to have a contract list, similar to that, like a list of contract addresses, instead of just sort of tokens, right? So that's sort of where my head is at about this. And then Morgan joined the show here at the stage, so maybe I'll stop talking and take a moment to cough and whatnot, and give him a chance to speak.
Feel better. So for the longest, I've been thinking about when, for example, folks upload their contract from Okashi to FutureNet or TestNet. How do I leave a footprint that can link back to the source code that's on Okashi? And I used the memo, and the memo is like so short that I had to squeeze in those identifiers to fit the available space. So that's not great. But if we adopted some sort of I don't know, like a schema for contract meta on like the keys and those values, I bet if we adopt that cap, if we define it and adopt it, I bet you would have like a bunch of Stellar Community Fund submissions building out discovery tools utilizing the data um, in those meta fields for the contracts. I think this could be a very nice addition, and this would live literally as part of the executable WASM. I'm flooding. What does that mean?
Yeah, because like there's like two sides of this. One side is you have a contract ID and you want to know information about it, and the other side is you have a domain address and you want to know that the contract you're about to interact with is valid. I think on the security front, I'm primarily concerned with the security of it, right? You could create a contract, but just because you put metadata on there doesn't mean you've proven anything, right? I could put apple.com. That doesn't mean apple.com has anything to do with my contract. So you have to kind of prove both of these things at the same time, which is, I think, where the TOML file comes in, because ultimately I care a little bit less about discovering cool new random DeFi protocols from a long list of contract hashes and more about I'm interested in this domain that I've landed on and want to make sure that I'm interacting with the right proven contract IDs for this domain that I already trust. So both of these things have to be linked at the same time, I think. And to me, that's the contract address points to a TOML file, and then the TOML file lists that contract address. So the domain has said, these are my contracts, these are official contracts. And then the contract itself says, this is where you find the official TOML file. And those two things are then linked together to have some proof and validation, both if you're given a contract ID first or a domain first, you're interacting with the right thing. Anything to add there, Lee or Morgan?
Yeah, I think I really love what Morgan was suggesting with, this data, these keys, these values, they just get stored, in the contract WASM, which means they're just available wherever you're using the WASM. And there is actually a feature in the SDK today that allows you to do this. The contract meta macro, which I just dropped a link into the chat. If you have a look there, anywhere in your contract, you can just drop the contract meta macro and provide a key and a value, and that key and value ends up in the resulting WASM. And so what that actually looks like in terms of WASM has a WASM file is broken up into what they call sections. And so there's function sections for the functions that are the contract functions. And there's these other sections called custom sections, which are really just a place where you can put arbitrary data. And there's a contract meta v0 is what the section is called. And then so those keys and values, they end up as entries in that contract meta v0 section. So any any tool that has exactly what you just posted there. Any tool can basically read them out of the WASM by just reading that custom section.
Yeah, and like this is a very elegant feature. We have space in those WASMs and they're easy to parse. And explorers could adopt this. Like I said, Still Community Fund could fund a bunch of initiatives to like aggregate these things for discoverability, or like one of those directory projects could link back and use this data. And if it's a TOML file, then the website changes it, then you're like, so do we store a hash in there? Versus if it's in the contract meta, then you don't have to do like a second call, and it's on chain.
No, I
And
mean it has to be both though. Like I could deploy a contract right now and say, like, what are you putting there? I guess is my question, and proving
well,
that what you're
so
putting there is legitimate.
that's true. Like the source of truth is obviously questionable because these are just like meta fields. But I would love to use this, for example, for Akashi, putting in like the project identifier for that contract that's on the network for then a block explorer maybe to integrate and link back to the REST code. That would be a nice feature. I see a bunch of those developing.
Hmm.
But again, like you could spoof it and be like,
Right. That's my primary concern is I don't want anything getting adopted that's that easy to spoof, where the code isn't actually the code, where the domain actually isn't the domain. I don't think it's hard to prove those things, but the security or just having it on chain doesn't actually prove anything. The security comes from the domain authority, like the actual URL. And if you change it, then you need to make sure you update your contract or just deploy a new one. I mean, this is the problem we have with Stellar TOMLs today. When somebody puts it in their home domain, right? Well, what if my home domain changes and I've removed all your signers? Well, hopefully you kept your domain around and can do like a redirect or something. But it's still that's where the proof is that this domain, which is owned by this entity that I trust, has pointed to this particular contract and said it's legitimate. You can trust its keys.
well, maybe so that part of that standard could be a definition for how to do this check, whether the data is authentic, that's stored
Sure.
in
I
the
agree.
contract. So like, a hash or whatever, to confirm the contents could be one way of doing it. Now, obviously, different fields would carry different implications, and like some of them you would want to do this, but some of them you really wouldn't care. Like I don't know, if someone posts contract meta author at Morgan, and it's not me that's the author of that contract, like what does that mean? I don't think anyone
Well, how
would.
do you prove? Like, how are you proving that it's not you?
No, but like you create author and GitHub repository in like a package JSON, and you ship it to GitHub, and I mean that's
Yeah, but you
just
still have to create some sort of standard that says that that's like where the authority comes from. It really, really matters. I think it matters more than any other standard of just keys and values is
So you,
proving that this thing's legitimate.
so you think as part of the standard, we wouldn't have to take it, like, confirm every single field? There's no like levels to this.
Yeah, maybe I don't necessarily disagree, but we need to create a set because I think it's arguable that if a field doesn't have proof of some sort, then it's not that valuable.
Okay.
Because again, if the whole idea is to show people information that they would find useful, it's only as useful as it is legitimate. Otherwise, it becomes dangerous. But I love this idea. I think this is really important for showing more like human readable interfaces. And even just for me, a lot of it does come down to the authentication of I don't want to see a contract address in isolation. I want to have some assurance that the contract address that I'm about to interact with is legitimate. But I suppose there also is the aspect of what's its title? What project is it a part of? Who wrote it? Where's its GitHub repo? But all that information, while really nice, again, if it's not true, becomes kind of dangerous.
So beyond the security implications, I want to focus on the beautiful user stories that can come from this. And like Naman said, you're browsing through invocations, just discovering what's going on in the chain, and then you see calls using these whatever C blah 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 base 32 encoded addresses, and then you cannot continue that journey. Versus if this was implemented as a standard, then the journey continues, because if the Explorer implements the standard, they get the DApp URL, link it to the thing, and then the person can actually continue that journey from this after discovery, continue that journey, and then it flourishes. That's a beautiful user story.
Only if it's secure, right? Because if you're scrolling through that and you see, oh wow, this DApp is popping off, and you click on it because you want to interact with it and you want to be included, but it's all a spam and it's not real and it's not being authenticated, then you just got scammed. Which again, I think these things are pretty easily solvable, but it isn't just showing cool information. It has to be proven.
All right, but in terms of game theory, right? Let's say you're a scammer, and you put in your contract meta that your DApp URL is a legitimate DApp, but it's a different contract. But your contract is trying to spoof it. So what happens if the user clicks that link and then they're taken to the legitimate DApp? Is there a game theory path for the scammer to win something out of this? And this one particular case, I know there might be other cases, but
yeah, so long as it's like that's the way it works, and that's how we write this app, so that there are those particularly like when a domain is involved and the domain is also proving this is a legitimate contract and I didn't just link to the wrong thing, or I think in this case, like generate a lot of activity that isn't actually a bunch of different users, but those are probably downstream things to solve for.
But it's a good point, though, right? The thing is, like, if like whatever mechanism we decide as an ecosystem to adhere to here, right, that becomes a standard, and at some point in the future, I feel sure that this mechanism will use to sort of to sort of essentially lend to the security of a contract, right? So what's going to happen is somebody's going to make a token list. They're going to go look at this information. And then if the information is mostly correct for most contracts, they might even say, hey, you know what, let's just sort of use this. But then, that's sort of creates a scam vector for sort of a nefarious contract to come in, do bad things, right? And so it feels to me like these are two separate concerns, security for usability, but they're both really important ones. And like whatever we decide, it should probably account for both.
Cool. I agree. I think is the next step, Naman, would it be to draft a discussion, just like start a discussion in the Stellar Protocol repo?
Yeah. I think so. Like that sounds right to me.
I remember the way we did it with WebAuthn, where people just sort of submitted their ideas, or there was a thread to submit ideas. I think we could start a thread for like, hey, how would you use it? Um,
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to get feedback on what sort of meta people are thinking about storing in contracts, and then yeah, as you said, like how people are going to use that. Um, what's the like we're ultimately talking about some sort of interoperability with maybe wallets or tools or something that'll use that data. What does that look like? And the verification story is definitely important for certain types of meta. And we do have some prior art that we can look at for that as well. There's some SEPs that have come before that on themselves didn't have much traction. There was SEP 32 asset addresses, which has verification. The SEP 1 or SEP 2, I think, has verification for like how do you verify that something on chain and something off chain are um, connected. And it really is just that reverse lookup. It's that reverse connection. You look in one place and it points over there, and you look in that other place and then it points back to that first thing. So yeah, there's definitely, I think, something that can be done here. So I think on the Stellar Protocol repo, if you go to on GitHub to the Stellar Protocol repo, the discussions tab, yeah, that's definitely a place to start a discussion about something that's going to become a standard. Um, this would end up in a SEP, so not a CAP. So CAPs contain proposals to change the protocol, the Stellar protocol itself, in terms of like what nodes are implementing. And this would be a SEP, which stands for Stellar Ecosystem Proposal. So it's like a proposal or a standard that exists outside of the Stellar protocol.
Excellent. Naman, anything else on that?
I think we should do both, right? Like there is it sounds like there's two paths, but the path forward has sort of two steps to it. One is let's start fleshing the idea out itself, which can be done in GitHub discussions. Like Morgan, do you want to start a post on it? Sounds like you have a pretty good you have like a solid opinion on how you want what this to look like. So if you just sort of post on discussions, we can participate and contribute there.
Discord, right?
On the GitHub discussions, I would say
Got it.
start with the idea itself,
There.
but I think you should make a Discord post as well that then talks about how people will actually use it, right? Because to me, the mechanics of the mechanics of sort of the standard here and the use are two different aspects. And GitHub discussions is more focused on like what the mechanism and the idea should be, and Discord thread can be about like how people actually intend to use it, the use cases and whatnot. That makes sense.
It does. I just want to make sure, is the Stellar protocol the right repo? I think Lee mentioned that that would be a cap, a place for caps.
The discussions
this-
can be. Go ahead.
The Stellar Protocol repo actually contains caps and SEPs. So if you have a look in there, you'll see that they both exist in the same repo, and that discussion is a great place to start a discussion about something that will become either of those things. Sometimes it's a little bit fuzzy. Maybe something we're talking about is actually a combination of both a protocol change for the network and a standard that exists outside of the network protocol. So, yeah, you don't need to, I don't think we need to dwell too much on, is it a cap or is it a SEP at this point in time, the discussion. But it does sort of sound like this will probably be, a SEP. I don't see a component of it that affects the actual protocol of the network.
Cool. I'll start that discussion.
All right. Sounds exciting. And then, cross post that in a Discord forum. I think that would be good. but pointing people out, we want to make sure people are discussing in the GitHub, which you can, reverse look up, cross post to both of those, the GitHub discussion on the Discord and Discord discussion on the GitHub too. I think it's a little more natural to discuss it on the Discord, but more canonical maybe on the GitHub. Okay, so the last item with our 10 minutes remaining is surfacing a fee. Issue. It's not really an issue. It's operating as expected, but it was unexpected to Orbit was the one who posted and ran into it. That I think it's worth just acknowledging and then talking through, particularly as we've hit phase 2, and then just helping ensure that the ecosystem is aware of how Sorbonne inclusion fees work. So I'm going to paste a link to that, and this is in the Sorbonne chat, so it's not a nice organized forum post. So you'll have to scroll a bit. But there was some really good information here, both in watching the ecosystem solve its own issues. I love seeing that. But then also the fact of what actually happened. So essentially, there's an Oracle that's running that was setting an inclusion fee or setting a transaction fee that was quite high, with the idea that it would only spend that fee if the ledger was full or if it was entering surge pricing. So this is something that most Stellar developers are very familiar with. And in Stellar prior to Sorbonne, and really in Stellar when it's running operations that are not Sorbonne operations, it's not a terrible idea to just set a kind of a max bid on the fee that you're willing to spend on the transaction being pushed through, with the idea that if the network is not in surge pricing mode, you'll pay the minimum amount possible, so often only 100 or so stroops. So best practice has kind of been set it as high as you're comfortable with, but it'll never really hit that, or it won't hit that consistently unless the network is just constantly and always in surge pricing mode. And that works okay when the understanding is that a ledger for non-Sorbonne operations can include is like 1,000 operations per ledger, and you can include 100 per transaction. So it's got a decent amount of capacity. But in phase 1 of the phase rollout of Sorbonne, that phase 1 you only had I think it was 100 transactions, but there are other concerns there. There are CPU limits that were very low. There were memory or byte writes and reads, and the number of writes and reads that were all quite low. That's what phase 2 increased. Like all those things you saw early on in that link that I posted at the beginning with the phase 2, like what was actually upgraded. You can have more transactions, more Sorbonne transactions, not because the ledger capacity of individual Sorbonne transactions was increased, but the the other limits were increased. So the number of CPU per ledger. So prior in phase 1, those were both the same thing. It was 100 million CPU, both for a per transaction and a per ledger. So you could only, if you used 100 CPU, there would only be one transaction in that ledger. In phase 2, I think it's 500 million. So you could have 5 maxed out Sorbonne transactions. So we're adding a bit of complexity just by the nature of Sorbonne transactions being more complex. There's more things to consider than just, is there 1,000 ops in this ledger? If so, then we're going to enter surge pricing. In Sorbonne, you might see, oh, it includes 100. I'm not doing 100, and what are the chances that we'll hit 100 and enter surge pricing? Well, it's not just that number, it's that number plus a lot of other numbers that you have to consider. And that's what happened in this particular case, is there were 2 or more transactions that were pushing past probably the CPU, I would imagine, limit. And so because that happened, it entered surge pricing, and the max fee was taken, which I think was set to 10 lumens or something like that. And because it was an Oracle, it was trying to submit at least 2 of these transactions every time the Oracle was trying to update its price feeds, and so it was always taking the max inclusion fee, which was 10 XLM. So it's 10 XLM for an Oracle, very expensive. They eventually got it sorted, so this is a little bit unique initially just because of phase one, where both the transaction limits and the ledger limits were the same. That's no longer the case. But it's also, I wouldn't say maybe a misunderstanding, but a non-obvious difference between Soroban and Soroban ops and non-Soroban ops. So you've got these like two different lanes running where there's a limit on the number of Soroban transactions per ledger that is significantly lower than non-Soroban transactions, but then it's also not just that 100 limit, it's CPU as well and a few others. So that's something you have to keep in mind, that it's a lot, it kind of boils down the TLDR, which I'm sure everybody at this point wishes I would have started with. The TLDR is you just have to watch your inclusion fee much more closely than you would on kind of prior to Soroban, so that you're not always hitting your max fee. And it's also much easier to hit surge pricing. Less easy now in phase two, but even as we increase traffic and there's more transactions, more Soroban transactions trying to be pressed into every ledger, or as an individual ledger may have not even just more Soroban transactions, but more CPU being used or more byte, right? What if two contracts try to write a big contract to the ledger at the same time? Well, now you can only have two of those, and you thought you had 100. So it could be pretty easy for it to still enter a surge pricing mode where you are going to be you are going to be paying whatever your max is in many more cases than you would prior to Soroban ops. This particular one was a little bit unique in that you weren't competing with like just the world. There were two transactions that were controlled by this particular Oracle contract. So two transactions were always competing with each other every time that Oracle was trying to be updated. So that's an easy one to watch yourself, is just make sure in the transactions that you're writing to a single ledger that you're not competing against yourself in a surge price and creating a surge price scenario that now you're like making yourself pay the max fee, which is kind of what happened here. Again, hopefully it'll be more rare, but something to keep in mind is you got to watch those fees. And I know, I know that there are, and maybe we can get some folks on to talk more about it. There are some documentation changes in the work to clarify this, and then maybe we'll get a new API, I've heard, perhaps, around looking at those fees more closely and monitoring those, which would then again help you to know what to set your inclusion fee to when building out a Soroban transaction. I'll be quiet now and let others talk.
Yeah, I think I completely agree that there is a lack of visibility. By the way, I'm Jane. I'm the product on developer experience. I think there's a lack of visibility in terms of how to set the inclusion fees, especially during surge pricing. And ultimately, the developers is making a trade-off between how much they're willing to pay and when they want that transaction to be included in the ledger. So for certain transactions, it's very time sensitive, whereas for others, they can wait a few ledgers down. And the inclusion fee is that is the value that you're willing to trade off for the time. So to be able to make that trade-off probably requires us to provide quite a bit more information in terms of the inclusion fee, not just what you are setting, but also across this distribution, what are the current inclusion fees that everyone else is setting. So to have that visibility, I think would be really beneficial. And so we are looking to design a new endpoint RPC to provide this. But I would be curious to also hear what other folks are looking for in this endpoint. If you're looking for like a percentile distribution or looking for something much more simplistic, like immediate, average, or something more normal, like something you would probably see in a typical wallet that helps you determine how fast you want this specific transaction to be included in your ledger.
I mean, all the issues that I've done, I think as a first starting point, there's no visibility into what the inclusion fee should be. So I feel like if we sort of take like a roadmap approach to it, V1 can simply be an API that returns, the highest probability of inclusion fee, like the best case inclusion fee that a transaction submitter should include. And then as phase two, we can sort of make it nice, allowing for time versus cost trade-offs. And then phase three, honestly, I would even have like a web page or something where I can just go and see what the current state of the ledger is, what the inclusion fees are, what's consuming most ledger space, so I can figure out how to sort of treat my data. But again, that's me. Love to hear from other folks too, especially wallets. If wallets are in the audience or any protocols, please come up and tell us what you think.
Wonder if we should open maybe once we have some docs that are underway or some stuff to point people to, we should probably start a Discord forum post to try and collect a little bit more information on this, because it is hard to know what to set your inclusion fee to. Because there's the static fee, and I posted a link. If kind of realize that we may not have explained inclusion fee all that well, but it's basically there's a resource fee which is static that's doesn't change that much. It changes a little bit depending on how large the ledger is, but there's not a lot you can do. The idea is that the resource fee is essentially this is how much your transaction is going to cost, just static. It doesn't matter when or who or what. This is how much it's going to cost as long as the ledger stays the same size. And then there's a refundable fee, which is things like the return value and events. So you can set that. That could be really large. And then you would get refunded. You wouldn't actually have to pay that depending on how many events or the return size. But that's kind of bundled up with the resource fee. And then the inclusion fee is essentially, okay, you've got all this work you want to do and you're willing to pay for it. How much on top of that, based on like the competition in the market of other transactions that will also be under consideration for the ledger that you submit to, how much are you willing to pay to actually get included into the ledger? And that's just a really hard, it's impossible to know what to set that to if you don't know what other people are also setting their inclusion fees to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if there are comments or questions on that, feel free to put them down. Let's make sure we start a discussion on this once we have more docs or this endpoint for people to play with or include it in some sort of I can't think of the name, but when you survey, thank you. There we go. Because I think this is really important, particularly as we're on mainnet now and people are spending real lumens to get things on chain. Fees are just a really important thing to have a lot of clarity on. All right. Any comments? Last things to call out. Otherwise, we are over the hour, so we can wrap up here.